From VOA Learning English, this is the Science Report. Large governmental groups controlled seed production in Africa for many years. Owners of small farms had to buy their seeds from these agencies. But now there is an effort to make seeds from other suppliers available to African farmers. Edward Mabaya grew up in Zimbabwe. He says his family's small farm was very successful because his mother used different kinds of seeds. Mr. Mabaya is now a researcher at Cornell University in New York. He leads the African Seed Access Index, TASAI, which researches Africa's seed industry. The organization was launched in March. It is a joint effort of Cornell University, a nonprofit group called Market Matters, Inc., and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. TASAI hopes to provide improved seeds to small farms. Mr. Mabaya says TASAI will try to improve different areas of the industry. Most farmers in Africa use the same seeds they have been planting for many years, unlike farmers in the Western world. The seeds have not been improved to resist disease or dry conditions. George Bajirwa works at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, or AGRA. He says there are not enough improved seeds in Africa to supply the millions of farmers who need them. He says improved seeds can help farmers increase their production by 6 times. Mr. Mabaya says if seed companies and farmers in Africa keep using the same agricultural technology as the rest of the world, someday Africa will be able to feed itself. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Science Report. A newly published report says sunscreen harms coral reefs. Corals are animals that live in the oceans and seas. Sometimes they are called the rainforest of the sea. They create some of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet. Their great spread of colorful rock-like structures form exoskeletons in the water. The exoskeletons become homes to other very tiny ocean animals. But pollution, warming seas, overfishing, and sunscreen are destroying corals. John Fouth is a biology professor at the University of Central Florida. He is also a scuba diver. Fouth says the chemical in sunscreen called oxybenzone is harmful to corals. The chemical blocks the sun's ultraviolet light, the substance that causes sunburn. Fouth and his team did toxicology studies on oxybenzone. He says they showed that the chemical causes the exoskeleton to turn white. He says it also damages the adult coral's DNA. And he says that genetic damage hurts the development of very young coral. John Fouth says oxybenzone affects more than the coral alone. He says it also hurts all the creatures that depend on the reef for homes and food. The scientist suggests that people use sunscreen without oxybenzone. He says people can also protect their skin by wearing wetsuits or other clothing in the water. The scientist says that would help protect individual corals, the reefs they form, and the animals that make their homes there. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans. From VOA Learning English, this is the Science Report. Israel knows how to deal with drought, the lack of water. The small country has experienced dry weather conditions and water shortages for many years. California is in the 4th year of a drought. So a Jewish group proposed a conference to show Californians what technology, knowledge, and support Israelis have to offer. Barry Broad is head of the Sacramento Jewish Federation. He says the meeting was a product of Sacramento's sister city relationship with the Israeli city of Ashkelon. In California, many people pay a flat rate for their water. They pay the same amount whether they use a lot of water or very little. Israel treats water differently. Alan Adar is director of the Zuckerberg Institute for Water Research at Ben-Gurion University in the Negev Desert. He says water is considered a national resource, like oil or natural gas. The Israel Water Authority sets the price of water. Mr. Adar says that the more water someone uses, the more they must pay. He says he thinks this is the key for success. Israel has 5 desalination plants in operation. They remove salt from seawater so it can be drunk and used to cook and clean clothes. More than half of the water for homes, farms, and businesses comes from this desalination process. A desalination plant will soon begin operating in California. Mr. Adar says the biggest barrier to solving California's long-term water problem may have more to do with politics than technology. He says farmers, property owners, and water companies must work together to save water. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Science Report. The poaching or illegal killing of rhinos in South Africa is growing worse each year. The government recently reported that a record number of rhinos were poached in 2014. The killings continue, even though the government has increased efforts to try to stop poachers. Edna Malawa is South Africa's Environmental Issues Minister. She said that last year, 1,215 rhinos were killed. That is a 21% increase from 2013. The World Wildlife Fund, or WWF, estimates 20,000 rhinos live in South Africa. That is more than 80% of the world's rhinos. The animals are hunted for their horns. Many people in Asia believe the horns have healing powers, but there is no scientific evidence for this belief. The horn is made of something called keratin. That is the same substance as human hair, fingernails, and toenails. Ms. Malawa said 386 suspected poachers were arrested last year, an increase from the year before. But rhino protection workers say poachers often go unpunished after arrest. Ms. Malawa said more needs to be done. She said South Africa is taking strong measures to protect rhinos. This includes moving some of the animals to secret places in neighboring countries. She said 200 more rhinos will be moved this year. Jo Shaw is the Rhino Program Manager at the WWF. She spoke to VOA on Skype. She said losing 100 rhinos a month in South Africa is very worrying. Ms. Shaw said what is needed is careful, organized action on both the national and international levels. She wants the people who are responsible for killing the rhinos to be brought to justice. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Science Report. 5 years ago, oil leaked from an underwater well and into the Gulf of Mexico for 87 days. The well was operated by the energy company BP. The oil spill polluted major fishing areas, estuaries, and beaches along the Gulf Coast of the southeastern United States. BP was judged responsible and recently agreed to pay $18.7 billion to coastal states. That money can help pay for environmental and economic restoration efforts. Traditionally, about 70% of the shrimp Americans eat comes from the area. Large parts of the Gulf were closed to fishing after the oil spill. Coastal fishing areas are now open. But the owner of Blanchard Seafood says many of his former buyers never came back. Dean Blanchard says his business is probably losing $20 million a year in sales. He is still angry at BP. He says the oil companies in the Gulf only think about profits and not the environment. Port Fourchon has one of the largest oil and gas operation centers in the United States. It is near Dean Blanchard's business on Grand Isle. Kyle Graham heads Louisiana's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. He says the state's share of the BP settlement money will permit Louisiana to fix some problems. Visitors are returning, but there still are many effects from the BP oil spill. Studies have found oil and other chemicals on the sea floor of the Gulf and in the shells and bodies of different kinds of water animals. Kyle Graham says a full recovery will require more work. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.